Well, hello, good morning, and welcome to the Belong Collective. My name is Pastor Justin. Great to meet you digitally in this way or see you again. The Belong Collective is an inclusive, Jesus-shaped community practicing the way of love for the good of all. And we're so thankful that you're here with us, joining us in this digital format. We go back and forth from meeting in person to meeting digitally over the summer. That's something we've been doing. And so hopefully you've been able to join us in person. And if you haven't, here's some things coming up next. So obviously this week we are meeting digitally on YouTube and Facebook. And then next week we are meeting at Elizabethtown at a coffee shop named Folklore. You can find out all the details on our calendar there. That'll be a 10 a.m. meeting at Folklore. The address is there. We'll post some stuff this week on our social media about parking and such. But we're really looking forward to having a gathering there. And then the following week, August 15th, we'll be doing our church picnic. We'll be posting to where you can bring something to share at the church picnic. Really looking forward to our time together at the church picnic at Indian Echo Caverns. That's where we'll be for that. And then the following Sunday, August 22nd, we'll be back in a digital format like so. And then even the following week after that, we're doing Harrisburg Senators game. And so that's the month of August in kind of a snapshot. Really exciting, everything that is going on. I also just want to share an update of myself. I know many of you have reached out and asked, so that was the calendar of what's coming in the next month. But also some of you know I had made a post on social media, and I know not everyone's on social media, so I want to make sure that I announce this to you as our church, as our community, because I know so many of you would be interested in this information. But a week ago, or a week and a half ago, coming up on 2 weeks ago, I came to the finish line of an opportunity that was presented itself to me, and I signed a book contract, and I'm in the middle of writing a book, and I'm really excited about it, and it's in a very aggressive deadline, and so I've already completed what's called milestone 1. I have 5 milestones, and it's a lot of work, but it's really exciting, and I'm just super thankful. So many of you have texted me, emailed me, messaged me on either Facebook or Instagram, and just shared your support and encouragement, and said, so many of you were like, it's about time, like you wrote a book. And I'm just like, I don't know. I mean, I think it's going to be a really cool opportunity, and I'm excited to write a book, but I don't know. There's definitely times where I'm like, I'm not an author. I can talk maybe, like I'm a good spoken word kind of person, like but writing and typing and forming sentences, not really my strength, but it is really encouraging for so many of you to reach out and say what you've said. So much kindness already. I'm incredibly grateful for this community and your support in this process. And so over the next couple months, a lot of my time is going to be put into that, but I'm really excited about it. The project is it's a devotional book. It's a gratitude devotional book for men primarily. Obviously, you'll all be able to read it. But anyway, but I really think it is actually going to be super helpful. I think so much of the principles that apply are really going to be things that hopefully our church community will benefit from. And so I'm looking forward to sharing it with you when it's out, and just super thankful for all of you and your encouragement during this process. It's been an exciting, random journey, not really something I was looking for. It kind of happened, and isn't that the best when like God kind of surprises you with an opportunity? And that's kind of where I am, and I'm just, again, incredibly thankful for all of you and to be on this journey with you. Just want to remind you, if you want to learn more about the Belong Collective, if you're new with us, or if you just want to connect and learn more, the Belong Collective .org, you can go there. You can, again, find our calendar, make sure you look at all the events coming up. Another really big piece of information, we heard a lot of feedback that you really enjoyed Hershey Lodge for the few meetings we had there. So it's looking like we're in the middle of lining up September and October. That will be our regular meeting space. Now, we won't be meeting there every single Sunday, but it will be our regular meeting space for those 2 months. So it might be that we meet there 3 or 4 times a month and have 1 digital gathering or 2 digital gatherings. We're still working out all the kinks with that. But either way, we want to encourage you to let us know what you think about that facility. We're getting some better signage because we know it's a little bit of a maze once you get in there. We totally understand. But But the goal is that will become, at least for the fall, a regular space for us. It's met all of our needs each time we've met there. And again, we've received really good feedback. So we'll be there for a few months and we'll reevaluate at the end of that. But if you have ideas for us of locations, we know Hershey's a fairly central location for most of us. But if you have ideas, let us know. It's been an interesting time trying to rent in the midst of kind of COVID reopening things. Some of the challenges there is that some of the places that we have relationships with have either stopped renting and they just haven't reopened that yet. Of everything else that's reopened, that's the one thing they haven't reopened. So either that's the factor, or they have reopened their rentals, but they just don't have enough staff right now to either staff it or to adequately like manage weekend rentals or particular rentals like ours. And so it's been challenging because we know there's a lot of opportunities out there, but just some of them haven't really materialized, whereas Hershey Lodge has been very reliable and a blessing in the midst of all of this. And so we're looking forward to the future and getting to some normalcy within our schedule going into the fall. That's our hope. That's our prayer. Again, thebelongcollective.org for our calendar, and all the updates for future dates for Hershey Lodge will be there too. So just get familiar with going there and looking for that. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram as well and stay connected in that way. Happy Sunday.
What if we could love the way Jesus did? Passionately, faithfully, powerfully. What if the way we love could make a difference in the world around us? What if that love looked at everyone the way God does? A love which doesn't see the past, but is consumed by a desire to see people come to know Jesus. A love which is patient and kind, not envious or prideful. A love which puts others before ourselves, chooses peace over anger. A love which protects, trusts, hopes, perseveres. Do we love like this? Do we love like Jesus? Maybe it's time to ask a simple question. How can we love better?
Well, today we're continuing our series, Who Would Jesus Love? And this is kind of like a play on words or a question, just like the What Would Jesus Do movement was a whole question, a bracelet you wore, a thing you pondered before you made a decision. What would Jesus do in this situation? What would Jesus do? I should do what Jesus would do is kind of the idea. But we're asking a deeper rooted question in that, who would Jesus love? Because often what fuels and motivates what we actually do is who we think we're called to love. I mean, we even go back to this question of the second greatest commandment, where Jesus is approached and asked, like, who's my neighbor? And the question there we often think about is like, oh, well, it's just a determiner of like, how close am I to somebody to determine whether or not they're my neighbor. But there was a huge debate at the time of Jesus on what your neighbor, like what meant neighbor, like what the Old Testament passage about loving your neighbor, what the idea about like being there for someone else, like, did that only extend to my Jewish neighbor, or did it also extend to my non-Jewish neighbor? And did it extend to like my non-Jewish neighbor who's my enemy, like the Samaritan? Did it extend all the way to them? And there was all this debate, and Jesus comes on the scene and makes it very clear that it's all encompassing, it's inclusive. The love of Jesus and the call to love your neighbor as yourself is a call to love your fellow human as yourself. And so when we consider who would Jesus love, the easy answer is everyone, right? The series done, everyone, you know? That's really the easiest way to answer this. Yet, there are certain realities that Jesus enters into where he feels a need to express love for a particular people group. And like, I don't want to get political here, but I think this is really important. We say Black Lives Matter. And part of the reason we as a church say Black Lives Matter is because there's a large group of people saying they don't. Now, we certainly also believe all lives matter. We would never say there's any lives that don't matter. All lives matter, like 100%. But by saying Black Lives Matter, we're drawing attention to a group of people who historically, who currently are dealing with injustices that have determined that clearly their lives, at least in the way in which they've been treated, don't matter as much as others in our culture and in our society. And so we call out the injustice. We say what matters. So when Jesus asks this question of who's my neighbor? And he responds with a story of a Samaritan, being the Good Samaritan story, where the Samaritan's the one who actually helps and heals and ultimately is the one who shows compassion and benevolence and gives of himself to care for this other person, likely a Jewish person who he would have been taught to hate from day one of his life. When that kind of love is shown by somebody, it's Jesus saying Samaritan lives matter. It's Jesus saying this group you have not loved and they need your love because we're called to love everyone. He doesn't just answer the question when he's asked who's my neighbor, and he says everyone. He notices the motive is to get out of loving a group. And so he responds by elevating that group. Not saying they're better than anyone, but saying this group, think of them in the best way possible, like a good Samaritan who stops. And by the way, this isn't a good Samaritan. This is like a great, outstanding, amazing Samaritan. Like this person goes above and beyond any of the cultural standards of that particular day. And he does so after two other very religious, very pious people pass right by and don't do anything. And so this particular story shows us that Jesus is motivated by love and has a call to get others out of the boat to love, like off the sidelines to love and to love fully, but also calling them to particular people groups who have been at the margins, who have experienced hate, or at the very least, experienced just a religious culture and a culture of society that has been withdrawn from them, that has not included them, and that has ultimately hurt them by their behaviors and their actions. So he draws attention to it. No different than when we think of the breast cancer walk. Having breast cancer is a very unique experience. To have a weekend where you get people together who have journeyed through this terrible thing that is breast cancer, and you connect them and you raise money and support and care for a particular people group, you are not saying that all cancer doesn't matter. You're not saying that only breast cancer matters, but you are saying that breast cancer matters because it's a unique experience. And ultimately, you want to connect people in this way. You want to call out a particular experience that people are living. You want to draw attention to it and hopefully provide healing for it. And so, I say all of that as a setup because I think what's so unique about the Jesus story, and even more as I've been focusing on this series of Who Would Jesus Love, Jesus comes on the scene and immediately starts to identify these people groups that have been pushed to the margins, that have been unloved for so long, and even, and this is really important, systemically unloved. So this week, what I really want to dive into is the idea that Jesus enters into a system where men and women were very much on different planes. And look, we can say today there's a huge pay gap. We can talk about all the injustices against women in the 21st century, and I'm here for it. I think it's 100% a conversation necessary and a conversation the church should be leading, because for so long we have been in a place where we've kept our pulpits from having women in them. Still, churches today are doing that. We've said won't allow women on elder boards. There's just all kinds of things the church is still doing today. And ultimately even some of the just absolute abusive nature toward women, whether that's power dynamics over, whether that's legitimate abuse of, there's just a lot that the church, and I'm just talking about the church, obviously we can venture out into culture and that's existing there too. So, but as I think of the church in our position to look like Christ, to desire to love like Christ, we can definitely own a lot in the 21st century as a church about ways we've missed that. Just in my lifetime in the church, I know how many women have come forward and shared their experience and how heartbreaking that experience has been, simply because of the dynamics, and their gender is the only real factor that's either limiting them or providing the particular experience that they're having. And that's why I'm a huge advocate for women in ministry, and that's why I'm so excited that we had an opportunity to have Allie as a campus pastor when we had 2 campuses, and we have women on our board. We will always have women on our board. I think it's so incredibly important to have the gifts of all people represented, to have as diverse a group as we can speaking into the leadership of the church. I think so often when we see the rise and fall of these churches where there's conflict and stuff, usually it's because there's not a lot of diversity represented in leadership. And so there's a lot of blind spots. There's a lot of missed realities in what people are experiencing, and people who are being hurt aren't being heard because there's just not a diverse enough group in leadership. So I firmly believe in women in ministry. The Belong Collective firmly believes in women in ministry. This is one of our values. And so I say that just to say Jesus comes on the scene in the first century, and as bad as we think it is for women today, then it would have been a lot worse. Now, we're not talking all the way back to Old Testament times where it's just simply a woman is property, but it's pretty close. It's a place where women don't have dignity or access or means or any advantage in society. And especially when we get into the religious buckets, right? A rabbi like Jesus is not really supposed to talk to women, approach women. How he has conversations with women needs to be really careful. But Jesus enters into conversation with women regularly. Many would even argue he has women that are disciples, and I would agree with that. The first person who finds out about the resurrection of Jesus is a woman. I think that's pretty important when we think about Easter being the most important holiday in the Christian calendar, and the fact that the first person to speak he has risen is a woman. I think that might tell us all we need to know about Jesus' position and God's position on the importance of women in the ministry of the church. Yet, we still have many people who would say, no, women don't get as much access. They don't get as much opportunity because God made it this way. And I guess I don't have a whole lot of patience for that, because when we see the ministry of Jesus, we see an inclusion of women, and we also see him, and this is what I think is so important and why I'm connecting it back to Jesus' love for all people, but then wanting to emphasize particular things. Jesus multiple times, like the one I just gave you, the first person to declare the resurrection of Jesus is a woman, right? That's not by accident. It's not like that, oh, that just accidentally happened. No, that's intentional. There's an intentionality there that we would read and see that someone in that culture who is the less significant, and I'm not saying that in any true terms, I'm saying based on the culture of that time, the person who is less significant is the one who is given the most significant revelation. What does that tell us? That tells us that God clearly is inclusive of women. And if he is risen is not a declaration of ministry, then I don't know what is, right? And then when we think about how Jesus, so we're talking about in essence, the end of Jesus' ministry, he is risen, right? And the beginning of Jesus' ministry, when Jesus starts his ministry with his disciples, and the first time Jesus ever declares himself as the Messiah is to a woman. This was a statement. This was a statement like saying Black Lives Matter. And I don't want to say Jesus would say Black Lives Matter or that's what he's saying, but I'm saying it's a statement to say my ministry, the very first person I'm going to reveal myself to is a woman. The disciples who've already decided to start following me, I haven't even told them 100% who I am. Some of them have their suspicions, but they haven't heard it from my mouth who I am. But I will tell this woman who I am, and it'll be the first person that I tell. Very fascinating that he would choose a woman to share this with. Why is that fascinating? Because no other rabbi is even having a conversation with a woman like the one Jesus is having. So this is in John 4, and I'm just going to kind of skim it because if you want to go read John 4, I think it's a pretty amazing read. John 4, 1 through 42 would be what I would encourage you to read if you want to read it. But Jesus is in the midst of baptizing. He ends up dipping and going out. He says he has to go through Samaria, but he didn't really have to go through Samaria because most people would go around Samaria because Jews and Samaritans hate each other. But Jesus is like, I have to go through Samaria because I have to make a statement. Going through Samaria alone is a statement in itself. The fact that Jesus would walk through Samaria, his disciples are incredibly sketched out by this. And so they're walking through Samaria. He sits down at a well, sends his disciples in. There's a woman at the well at the 6th hour. This is noon. So in the 6th hour, this woman comes to the well. Now, no one's coming to the well at noon unless you're an outcast. So not only is Jesus going to talk to a woman that's a Samaritan, which is enough to be like, okay, you found like the lowest of the low woman in this particular culture if you're a Jewish person. But now we're finding out that she's an outcast even within the Samaritans. So he's talking to a woman, not really supposed to do this, an unloved category, let's put it that way, but Jesus wants to express love to this woman. A Samaritan, again, another person who he's not going to be necessarily inclined to express love toward, and an outcast even within that culture. Like within her own tribe, she's been pushed out because she's drawing water at noon instead of in the morning and the evening with the rest of the tribe. And so Jesus, sitting down at this well, as this woman approaches, says, "Will you give me a drink?" And she is shocked because she's like, "You can't ask me for a drink. We're not supposed to even be associating with one another. Did you not get the memo? We're really not on the same page. Like, this is, like, culturally speaking, I'm surprised you're even here. Why are you walking through Samaria? You guys are supposed to go around Samaria. That's what you always do. You're coming right through." Interesting decision. And they go on to have this conversation. And then she says, "I can see that you're a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but you Jews claim that the place where we must worship is Jerusalem." So she gets to the heart of the matter of the theological dispute. The theological dispute between the Samaritans and the Jewish people, the Israelites, the theological dispute here was, where do we worship? Do we worship in the temple or do we worship on this mountain? So the question was like, there's where we're supposed to worship, where we're called to worship. You say there's where you're supposed to worship. Who's right? This is the great question. Here's what Jesus says. "Believe me, woman, a time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem." So he's kind of like, there's a time coming where like this whole conversation, this whole theological debate that you're having isn't going to matter. It's not going to be important anymore. He says, "You Samaritans worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is from the Jews. Yet a time is coming and has now come when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth, for they are the kind of worshipers the Father seeks. God is spirit, and his worshipers must worship in spirit and in truth." So God's saying, like, or Jesus is saying here that like God's motive is not that we would be bound to these locations, but that ultimately it would be a transformation of our spirit toward truth. That like that love would so capture our spirit that it would bring about a truth within us that this place in which it's happening isn't important, but that it's happening is what's important, that we are the physical location that's being transformed, not a building, not a location, a holy sacred site or place, but that holy sacred site or place is within us, that we are image bearers of the Almighty. And so when we are transformed, there is a beauty in this. And so Jesus is speaking this reality. And here's what the woman responds. The woman said, "I know that Messiah called Christ is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us." So she's like, I've heard that there's a time when the Messiah called Christ is coming. When that happens, you're right, it'll be like that. But almost you wonder if there's a tone here of like, but we're far off from that happening. Kind of like we've all been waiting for the Messiah for a long time. We know clarity will come with the Messiah, but it's going to be a while. And then Jesus says, I who speak to you am he. I who speak to you am he. This is a radical thing. It's a revelation to this woman about who he is. And about, like, not only must her jaw have dropped from him saying this, but the fact that if he's telling the truth, and she's already called him a prophet, so she clearly is like, you know something, you're different than any of the others. Like, she can tell there's a presence to him, a supernaturalness to him. And so she's like, I'm not supposed to be the one getting this information. This isn't really for me. I'm a Samaritan. I'm a woman. I've been incredibly pushed out by my culture, largely because of promiscuity, it seems, based on the text or based on the likelihood. Like, you're just like, she's the last person you would reveal yourself for the first time as the Messiah. Yet, Jesus is making a statement. Who would Jesus love? I would love the woman that everyone says is unlovable. So much so that she has to draw water by herself. Now, he can say, if someone came up to him and asked him a question, who do you love? Who would you love? Well, I love everyone. Okay. But what he actually does instead is through his life and even through his parables, he pulls out this like subversive even. It's so subversive to be in Samaria, and it's so subversive to sit down at a well with a woman. We didn't even get into all the ways that this could be taken and approached, that this could have, like, to be sitting with a woman at a well alone. It's almost like a date, and to ask to draw after her jar, it's almost like a pickup line. Like, there's all kinds of implications. I'm not saying that's what Jesus is doing, but let's put it this way. In that context, it's an intimate setting that one should not be alone in this place with a woman like Jesus is. Yet he even breaks that rule for the sake of loving this woman and seeing this woman, hearing this woman, even affirming this woman's worldview. I think when we consider who would Jesus love, we've obviously been looking at all kinds of marginalized characters and people groups in this series, and we're going to continue to do that. But as we consider women in general, it's like the fact that the church has so got it wrong over 2,000 years up to this point, where women still aren't included, it's not shocking because we get it wrong in so many places often, it seems. But it also is shocking because Jesus seemed to be so bold and clear about the inclusion of women in his ministry. And for us, when we consider this conversation about, do we include women? Where do we include women? Especially for those of us who have been raised in a church context that probably, or maybe if this is your experience, I don't know your experience, maybe your context was very inclusive of women. Maybe even you grew up under a female pastor, and that's awesome. But I'm saying for many of us, if we grew up in a traditional evangelical context, or even just a traditional conservative context, we probably grew up without having women as elders, without having women preaching from the pulpit, and with there being a lot of barriers on the type of leadership that could be accessed for women. And when we look at the ministry of Jesus, we're like, it was so radical to include women in this way. It was so incredibly radical to love women in this way. Not just to say it, but to do it in that culture was a statement. It was a statement that would have been flagrant. I mean, and I know I started this by using Black Lives Matter as as a reference, and maybe some of you, that's a flagrant statement to you. I don't think it's that flagrant a statement. Maybe you do. But the thing is like, if you think that's a flagrant statement, I think Jesus sitting in Samaria with a woman at a well, talking to her, giving her dignity for 42 verses of our Bible, like, that is a flagrant statement in that context. Because in that context, even talking to him, even giving a woman the time of day, it just didn't happen. And it certainly didn't happen by the religious elite, by a rabbi like Jesus. And so I think for all of us, right, we need to consider what we need to reckon within our spirit. And I know I've had to do a ton of work on this. And I guess I really want to talk to the men out there. And I guess even the women out there who have maybe, well, let me do it this way. Let me break it up in this way. Those of us who are men who have been raised in a conservative context, or who have adopted those views or held those views at some time in our spiritual journey, we have to do a lot of work to kind of uproot that. We have to do a lot of work to make sure we're not defaulting to that. We have to be introspective. We have to also listen to people who maybe criticize us and say that we're not being inclusive enough, that we're maybe. Let me speak actually from a position of humility where I've got it wrong, and where I've had women speak into my life and tell me I've got it wrong. There are times in conversation, especially like debates or just where we're idea sharing back and forth, where I will cut people off. And over time, it's been revealed to me that I am quicker to cut off a woman than I am a man. And here's the deal. My initial reaction to that was, no, I am not like that. I would never do that. I would never be biased. I cut everyone off equally. And really, I shouldn't be cutting anyone off, right? That's the real thing, is I shouldn't be interrupting. Things get passionate and I start talking and I get going and I interrupt. And it wasn't because of any desire not to include them, but I do believe there's something within me that is doing that and not even recognizing my own bias or my own, or I'm certainly not recognizing how that person feels when I do that, but I'm also not recognizing how I'm limiting that person's leadership in that moment, that person's voice, that person's opportunity to contribute. And I had to work on that, and I'm still working on that. I mean, I've been working on that for years. This is a conversation Allie and I have had multiple times, and I'm thankful for it, because I want to have a spirit where I can hear that feedback, where I can take a breath, where I can listen to it, especially when it's coming from sources, people that I love and trust, and be like, okay, this is real. I got to work on this. I got to get better at this. And maybe I didn't grow up in a context where women were allowed to speak into this process, and that's actually playing a role in how I'm interrupting someone. I don't know all the unconscious bias that exists within this brain, but I want to be humble enough to acknowledge that I probably have a lot, and I need to be open to listen and to say, I got to retill this ground and try to get some of these bad seeds out. Like maybe I feel like I've cut down the tree that is this, because I've got rid of everything I can see that is bias and that is unfavorable toward women, but there might be a lot of roots under there that still have to get tilled up. And that's going to be a painful process. It's going to require work, like it always does, to get those roots out of the ground. It requires work. And so I got to do that work. And so I just want to invite all of you, especially men who often can be gatekeepers in these situations, for us to consider what biases do I have? Even if I'm very open to women in leadership, what unconscious biases might I not have done the work to till up yet? Who could I ask about that? Who could I go to and be like, hey, share some feedback with me on how you see me leading, how you see me including others. And then I just want to say to women, and I'm very cautious to even speak to you at all, but I can just say this from the standpoint of like seeing this, is just to say, believe in yourself. God's given you leadership skills. Don't let churches or leaders gaslight you to believe that like you're not meant for the thing you feel like you're called for and meant for. Like that you feel called to do something like meaningful or to lead something, and then to have someone tell you, well, we understand you feel like you have those passions, but here's the deal. God wouldn't call you into that role because you're a woman. Like, some of you have been told that so much that even maybe as you've come out from under that theology, you still kind of believe it. And I just want to encourage you to not believe it. I want to encourage you to boldly step into whatever you feel God calling you to do. And if there's any way I can encourage you in that process, please let me know. I want to see a church where we say like women are included in leadership, and we do our best to point to that, even flagrantly say it, because it's been so flagrantly said the other way. That we are speaking, hopefully, enough into it to start turning the tide. I don't know how influential of a church we are, but at least within our church, we can hopefully start changing some minds and some hearts, and even moving people toward the freedom that exists when we have this diverse presence in leadership and in community. And I really think we have an opportunity here to restore so much brokenness that the church has created, I think, unnecessarily, and certainly, I would say, a brokenness that Jesus certainly would not have advocated for. Like, Jesus' inclusion of women would not have allowed for this type of experiences and gates and barriers to be put up for women. And so I also just want to invite, if you're a woman who considers the Belong Collective your home, I just want to say, if you ever have feedback for me on how I can be more inclusive of women in my preaching, if I ever use stories or terms or speak in a way that seems like it needs to that I have something I need to consider, please don't hesitate to shoot me an email. I am open to your feedback, and I want to be open to it. And if you want to know ways that we are continuing to work to include women, to work for even advocating for women in ministry, these are things that I've spent a ton of my time in ministry doing. And ultimately, Allie would be a great one to talk to about that. And she's on our board. She's our vice president of our board and used to be campus pastor when we were under our other name. But I just say all this to say, I know there's many people who are new with us and don't know that our spirit is to include women, or maybe just haven't necessarily heard us say that bluntly. This sermon is to say that. Like, who would Jesus love? Jesus would love those who are being pushed out, especially if it's only because of their gender. Why would we do this? And Jesus enters into a context where that was clearly being done, even worse than it is being done today, and advocated for women clearly, like flagrantly and unapologetically, and we should too. Amen.